Hi, here I am, live on YouTube. Let me make sure that I'm signed in so I can read the chat. Yes, I am. Ooh, wait a minute. Okay, I don't know. Let me just test and make sure I can. Oh, it's not letting me say anything in the chat, but it looks like. Wait a minute. Nobody's viewing this right now anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Why am I not allowed to touch the chat? Okay. Well, anyway. Oh, wait. Now it wants me to sign in on YouTube. I'm signed in? Like, what the hell? Sorry for the delay on this. Okay, whatever. I'm just going to hope that you guys, if you have questions, you say them in the chat and that I can see them. My Streamlabs is somewhat sketchy right now. I don't know. Welcome to Studio Stream. Here, my name is Rachel Pollock. This is my channel, La Bricoleuse, and today we're going to talk about a style of hat called the drawn bonnet, and I'm also going to be working on one here in a minute. Before I start talking about it, though, I want to make two really quick announcements. The first is tomorrow on a Facebook live stream called Fun Friday Millinery, I will be a special guest. It's attached to the fact that this month, June, is the 15th anniversary of me creating content under the name La Bricoleuse online. And so I'll be a guest on Fun Friday Millinery, which you could check out on Facebook Live. The woman that hosts it is named Denise Wallace-Spriggs, and it'll be through her business page called Study Millinery with Denise Wallace-Spriggs. So I'll put a link to that in the description of the video once this stream converts to video, and you can watch it after the fact and you can read that information. And if you want to come hear Denise and I talk about millinery and the fact that we've known each other since 1998, and the fact that I've been creating content in blogs and other platforms, now YouTube, since 2006. And the other thing I want to mention is next week's stream, a week from today, is my anniversary party stream. That's the real anniversary happens next week, 15 years. And if you have, my plan for that stream is to just sort of take questions from the chat. Oh, hi, somebody, Rare Blue Loot, who is the partner of the woman who taught me how to stream, is just commented in the chat here. Glad to have you. Thanks so much. I appreciate that you're willing to lurk while you're working. So to get back to what I was saying, though, next week is the 15-year anniversary, and I'm going to celebrate in this stream, and I will answer any questions, well, within reason. I mean, not like intimate personal questions, but well, I might. I plan on having a beer next week, so we'll see. Maybe towards the end of the stream you can even ask me grossly personal questions and I'll answer those. But what I intend to answer next week is questions about anything to do with costume production or the experience of running this blog and now channel for 15 years, what has changed in the intervening time about professional costume production or content creation online, anything. I'll be taking questions in the chat on this video, in the comments on this, in the chat on this stream, in the comments on the video after the stream converts to video, and comments on posts for the next 5 days or 7 days on all social media platforms. So I'll be mentioning it on IG and on Facebook and so forth. But if anything occurs to you that you're like, oh, this is a question, it doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about today, which is drawn bonnets, but you still want to ask it, go ahead and ask it, and I'll get to it next week in the party stream. So now let's get down to it with drawn bonnets. So a drawn bonnet is a description for a particular kind of hat that I have an example here, not of a drawn bonnet, but of a hat style, bonnet style, that predates the drawn bonnet. And I think it's pretty well acknowledged that this style inspired the drawn bonnet trend. And this, if you look at it, let me put it on so you can see how big it is. This is a style called a calash, C-A-L-A-S-H, C-A-L-A-S-H, calash. And you see how big this is, right? Like, I could have much more elaborate hair in here and it would protect my hair. And so when you think in history about when people have giant hairstyles, Revolutionary France, end of the 18th century, Marie Antoinette, all of those big Georgian hairstyles, that's when the calash comes into fashion. And it is a bonnet with, if you look here, this one, I have to give credit to the maker. I did not make this calash. This is one of my students' projects from millinery class. A student named Ellen Cornett, who actually just graduated this past spring. She's working at Utah Shakespeare Festival this summer, and then she's off to her life as a costume professional. But she made this beautiful calash. And if you look here, this is a striped fabric, and she used the stripes to determine where she was going to create these channels through which pieces of wire, in this case, you could also use cane and other types of cord and so forth, she used wire, are drawn through those channels to create this sort of cage-like structure. And I can actually accordion this back on itself. Put it back on again. But this, the calash, came into fashion to protect those giant hairstyles when women are traveling from, because, working class women are not having big Marie Antoinette hairstyles, right? Like, it's only the aristocracy, the most wealthy people who have those hairstyles. And these bonnets are intended to protect that hair just from the time in which they exit a carriage, go across the, whatever the equivalent of a driveway was, and enter a chateau or whatever. So, it affords a bit of protection. You wouldn't go through a hurricane with one of these and still keep your big bouffant intact. But what's important with respect to the drawn bonnet, which is what I'm going to be talking about and working on today, is the wire channel structure of this, the way it's kind of like a baby carriage cover. Have you ever seen perambulators like this? This structure inspired the drawn bonnets, because after hairstyles stopped being so giant and extravagant, the idea of this wire framework that supports this bonnet and allows it a little bit of collapsibility in some cases, continued to influence millinery trends. And with respect to myself, I've actually never made a calash because I'm a theatrical milliner and I just haven't had the opportunity present itself. You don't pick your projects as a theatrical milliner, and you don't even pick the materials that you use to create them most times. So, this is a great project for someone who have done it in my millinery class, but I haven't ever had call to make one of these. Have had 3 graduate students choose to make one now, so I've seen 3 of them get put together and brainstormed about different innovations. So I have some good ideas as to how I would create one, but just mentioning, I haven't. I have, however, made 2 drawn bonnets, particularly, let me hold this up here so you can see it. Well, I don't know if you will be able to see it because of how bright my wonderful studio lighting is, which is great for showing what I'm working on in my face, but it kind of blows out this research image. But if you look, like this hat here is a good example. This is a fashion plate from 1813, and it is, I picked it because it has several different designs of bonnets that you would make using this drawn bonnet kind of structure. So let me try again to show you some of those. This one down here, those two long sort of accordion looking ones. This one up here. Those are the types of bonnets, drawn bonnets, that I have made. And in fact, you know, this is a research image that I have seen a couple of times that has been provided to me by costume designers, because the two that I have made, I've been given a research image, something like this, and a drawing, a costume design drawn by the costume designer, and the fabrics, and then it's just on me to figure out how to make it. Those shapes, those long sort of coal scuttle shapes that are very restrictive of your view, is very different from this calash. You know, this is huge because it's not just encompassing your face, but also your giant hairstyle. And you don't have any problem with peripheral vision until you get to about, you know, right here with this. But with the Regency ones, it's a very sort of a chute that you're down in. And actually that wound up being the reason why the ones that I have made have actually never been worn on stage that I've seen. In both cases, it got cut before opening night because in tech rehearsal, it was too close to be able to light the actor's face so that you could see her in there. But it doesn't matter to me. I still had the experience of making them. And those beautiful bonnets went into our stock at the theater where I work. And in fact, one of them has been rented like 10 times. It's really quite beautiful. And because it is a drawn bonnet with the canes and reeds and wires through the channels, that can compress. And in fact, in one case, they've folded the brim back on itself and turned it into sort of a late 1870s hat. It's quite wonderful. What I am working on is another Regency bonnet in a drawn bonnet style with channels through which I am going to, instead of using wire or cane, I read a blog post from 2011, and in fact it was the second time I read the blog post, because the first time I made one of these bonnets, I read it at that time because this woman is a historical costumer. She creates replicas of hat styles, and she made one of these and documented the whole thing. And she used cotton yarn a double length of cotton yarn in her channels, because what she was using had enough sturdiness to the fabric that it didn't really need the stability of the wire. And I found that to be an interesting prospect. I think wire works fine, but one of the things you have to keep in mind with wire is if you get a bend in it, then you have to bend it back into place. But, you know, like for example, if it's a structure like this one has 5 channels right here up next to themselves. And if those 5 were all wire, which in this case, there's maybe 4 or 5 of them are wire, and then the rest of them are a jute cord. If they were all wire, then how would you correct a little kink that got into one of the wires? And I guess maybe 2 months ago on this stream, I shared a Regency drawn bonnet that another of my graduate students made. And this one was fully collapsible. There was a dramatic moment in the stream when I smushed that bonnet down flat, because it had no wire struts extending the length of the brim. And I love that about that bonnet because it makes it completely compressible. You can pack it to travel, which is definitely important in a 21st century sense when most of the folks who are wearing that style of bonnet are traveling to some sort of convention or period picnic or historical reenactment event. But it's important in a Regency context too, where, you might be traveling to visit family members and that takes a while to get there, so you're going to stay there a while. So if you could smush your bonnet up and pack it into a bag or a box, that's better than something that has a rigid structure to it and needs a huge box to protect it from damage. So I'm going to make one of these, or I've already begun to make one of these, and I'll put this aside now. Before I move on to working on it, though, I want to mention that my experience with drawn bonnets is limited to the Regency era, right after the turn of the 18th century into the 19th. So the calash here, that is in style, comes into style in 1780s, I believe, 1770s. As long as big bouffants are in style, people want to wear calashes to protect them. But as hairstyles change and dresses change and the entire culture changes because of the French Revolution and people overthrowing their aristocracy and the American Revolution, like the whole world has, or not the whole world, but definitely European and American culture, let's say that, has a lot of turmoil happening and overthrow of different upper class communities in different countries. And you see things go from being those big opulent pannier dresses where you look like an upholstered sofa to those slim Regency little cotton wispy dresses that now to the contemporary eye look kind of like a nightgown. Bonnets get small in structure at that time, but they do, some of them, retain that hooped structure to them. And the drawn bonnet that really comes in, I want to say around 1810, comes into fashion. It continues to be one way that people make bonnet shapes right up through the end of the American Civil War. The middle of the 19th century, like 1865, I think, is the last evidence of a drawn bonnet in this reference book that I have here. I see I have a question. Isn't cotton cord also used in some Regency corsets as boning? And yes, that's a wonderful point. That's true. There's a lot of uses of cotton cord and twisted material, jute and hemp and so forth in structural garments when like what you see is the change between the stays that people are wearing in the Georgian period, where they're really conical and they're really restrictive, and then the stays and the corsets that come into fashion in the Regency period employ those corded areas to impart structure, but to allow more freedom to the body. That's an excellent point, and I think that there's an interesting way to employ cord as a structural component to a drawn bonnet. In this reference book, which when the stream is over and you check the video that posts to YouTube, or actually I guess you can look at the description even now, there's a link to the blog post I mentioned of how to make a Regency drawn bonnet by a woman named Twyla T. That's what she posts she writes her blog under. And that's the one I first referred to. But this one here, this book, I just bought it recently. It is sold by a company called Timely Tresses, timelykresses.com. And it's written by a scholar, a woman named Danielle Perry. And she has done extensive research on this collection of actual surviving extant drawn bonnets from primarily the 1850s and 60s. And if you look at those bonnet shapes, they're more spoon-like and broad brimmed, as opposed to those very narrow brims of the Regency period. So, in this case, she's did a survey of drawn bonnets, but it's restricted to a time period that is beyond when I'm working on the bonnet that I'm working on. So I loved reading this because she really investigates the structure of these bonnets. She very carefully inspected them and talks about the ways and the things that are similar and the things that are different about the way the different makers chose to create these bonnets. Most of these bonnets that she surveyed have wire as the support structure. There are a couple that have cane. And if you are interested in making your own drawn bonnet, first thing I would say is decide what time period you want it to be in, because in the description to this video, if you want to do a Regency one, read the Twyla T. It's a series of 3 blog posts about how she created hers, and that inspired me to create both of the ones I have created and the one I'm working on now. But this one, sorry, there's a thunderstorm going on outside, so that's what that noise was. This one, she talks about all of these mid-century bonnet shapes and has a lot of great research from period resources like Godey's Lady's Book and so forth reproduced in here. So she sort of cherry-picked, like, here are all the things that you will want to read, including a really exciting, like, DIY style article that was posted at the time about, like, how to make your own drawn bonnet. It's the very last thing in the book is reproduced at the back. I'm showing it to you, like, you can see that. But she also walks you through sort of step by step with photographs of how to create a drawn bonnet according to what her research yielded of those mid-century patterns. Now, step back to the Regency, which is the time period I'm working in, and I had hoped to start this project like 2 or 3 weeks ago because I ordered this really lovely, let me show you, really lovely changeable crossweave silk. I don't want to say silk. I actually think it's polyester, but it's a crossweave taffeta where the threads going one direction are white and the threads going the other direction are blue. So we get this great reflectivity. That would be excellent on stage. Costume designers love those crossweave taffetas and dupioni silks and so forth, because they make their job easier. They make the costumes have a lot of depth underneath the stage lights, which tend to wash out everything and make it seem very flat. But if you choose a crossweave, it's not going to seem flat because it has that natural highlights and shadows. Anyway, I found a great price on this crossweave baby blue taffeta, which I teach at UNC-Chapel Hill, where our sports colors are Carolina blue, which is basically sky blue. So it's always like a pro if I can find something that's basically the school color to work in, because people on campus are like mad about sports and all that kind of stuff. I'm not so big on it, but whatever. Here is a sample that I did when I first received this. It took forever to get it because there are delays in the supply chain. And I'm only finally getting it, which is why instead of finishing the rabbit that I started patterning in my last stream, I decided to start this because I'm so excited about it, and I meant to start it 2 weeks ago. Here is a sample I created using the cotton, doubled cotton, as per that blog, to just test and see what I thought about its stability. And this is a good example. This is something, sample creation is something that I always do. Unless I have made literally the exact same thing and I'm just making multiples of it, you know. But so unless I've already made one of these bonnets and I now have to make 5 more, I'm going to make a sample of the technique that I hope to use to just test and make sure that it's going to work the way I want it to. And so I made this little doll bonnet here from a scrap of the taffeta, and per the blog post, the Twilaty blog post, she described sewing all the channels and then using, let me pull it out here, using a yarn needle and the yarn, of course, to run the stabilizers through the channels to draw them up, which that incidentally is where the name drawn bonnet comes in, because you are drawing up the material on these casings to impart some gathers and some dimensionality to it. So, you know, when it's flat, it's not a drawn bonnet. You have to draw it up. And so I drew up this little sample here to test what I thought about the stability of just a couple of cords run through these channels, and whether I thought, you know, was the density of the wrinkles that came from the drawing up enough to hold the bonnet brim in place, you know, or was it going to collapse on itself? Which, if you look at this one here, this collage, same concept, you'll notice that there's not a stabilizer in this outer edge. And if I remember correctly, when Ellen made the decision to finish this off, she purposefully left this last 1.5 inches unstabilized, mentally reckon, the word has just left me, basically figuring that it would function as a ruffle, like a little decorative ruffle, because we get a lot of you draw something up on a drawstring, you get gathers, you get a ruffle. And what she learned, what we all learned, was that there was not enough gather in that last drawn channel to actually impart the sort of stability to a ruffle that you would want. That if this was going to be a ruffled edge, probably should have been top applied, and it probably should have been gathered like 2 or 3 times as much as the pattern is gathered along that edge. So in the making of this sample piece here, I really wanted to see if I was going to have weakness between the channels. You know, if this was a flimsier fabric, then it might collapse in there and not want to stay poofed up rigid along that arc. But luckily, what I discovered is that this taffeta is really great. It's so crisp. The weave is really stable and tight, so that when I drew up these channels, I got this great gathered effect. And because it's crossweave, we can really see the depth of those gathers. And I also think that it is going to be rigid enough to be stable without any sort of rigid struts that go down the length of the bonnet brim. Now, that is something that's happening here on this one. We don't have any struts along the top part, but she did put stable wire piece that runs down the length here, up around the back of the neck, and down this side, which that is a structural element that you also see in those giant whisk collars of the Elizabethan era, where there's like a portrait collar of ruffled lace or pleated lace, and having a stable base that goes around the neck and down onto the shoulders is what gives it the support. And that is what gives this calash the support to sit up and hold the bonnet away from your hair or wig. But recall that Regency bonnet that my other student made that I was able to crush flat in a studio stream about 2 months ago. That one had no struts down the length of it. I will say, in the Perry book, most of the bonnets that she looks at that are mid-century do have those struts supporting the depth of the brim. And I haven't done enough research, and it's not really my purview to do so, unless I just personally feel like learning more about this. But I don't know that that is specific to that time in history. Like, I bet you can find, if there are extant Regency drawn bonnets, I bet you can find some that have stabilizing struts of wire or cane. And in fact, looking at that fashion plate that I showed you earlier, there are a couple of them that it's an illustration, but it appears to have evidence of something in there that's keeping it stable. I would like, ideally, because I'm making this just for my own pleasure, because it's something I want to do, and it's the summertime, and I'm not working anywhere right now because COVID, and I would like to make it collapsible without those struts, but it may turn out to not be possible. I'm to the point, would a sturdier or thicker cord make a bonnet out of cotton or finer fabric more rigid, or would it collapse because it gets too heavy? That is a very good question. And actually, I would say, another thing that I looked at when I began researching to do this bonnet, in addition to these references over here and revisiting the Twyla T blog post, is there's another YouTuber, I believe her channel is Miss Philomena, Philomena, who made a drawn bonnet out of a lightweight wool gauze. And that was a wool gauze is not a crisp material, or I don't think of it as a crisp material. But I would take a look at her video, and actually as soon as I'm done with this stream, I'm going to go back and rewatch it, because I don't remember if she used thick cord or wire or cane for her struts. But she got a lot of stability out of that bonnet, and I think it was the density of the gathers that she was able to put into that thin wool gauze. It's really a nice looking piece. As to whether it would collapse because it gets too heavy, that's a good question, and I think it probably depends upon the tightness of the twist that the cord has, because this yarn, here it is, this yarn that I'm going to use, it doesn't have, it's intended for like crochet and stuff. It doesn't have a really tight twist on it, but sometimes you can find cords where the twist is so tight that it belies how lightweight it is. It has a heaviness to it, not a heaviness, a stable structure to it, that I think might be good in a cotton or a lighter weight fabric like you're talking about. I would love, my next plan on this, if this works out, this taffeta one, is to try an even lighter weight bonnet fabric like organza. You know, I think organza is like questionable because the point of a bonnet is to be a sunshade, and organza is not going to keep the sun off of you at all. But in just thinking about it aesthetically, it would be exciting to have a bonnet that light could move through like that in a theatrical sense. Like if you think about it in a performance sense, not in a historical reenactment sense. Oh, I know her. I can't remember as well. But I think it was Reed. Yeah, you know, you're right. Now that you mention it, I think it was Reed too. And that's something that I haven't tried either. Not because I'm not interested in it, but because you can snap Reed in half. And in a theatrical context, like that's a nightmare, you know, that an actor could crush their bonnet and then you'd have to somehow get these smashed bits of Reed out of the channels and then replace them with something else. Like it would never work. But I will say, what I have seen used, which I think was just genius, is trimmer line, which weed whacker line, like it's plastic on a spool, but instead of being round, it has a square cross section to it. And I had a student build one of these collages with trimmer line in the channels because she was looking for something that would approximate Reed and be lighter weight than wire. And she also had carpal tunnel, which, by the way, I do too. I have my brace on here. She wanted to work with channel structures, but she didn't want to strain her hands by doing the kind of bending and cutting that you need to do with wire. And so she found this trimmer line, and it worked so well because of the square cross section of the plastic strip. So if you're not a huge stickler about absolutely accurate, historically accurate materials, that made such a beautiful cane replacement, I guess. So what I'm hoping to do in this stream today, which my stream goes till 3:45, I should at least get a little bit, I won't finish, but I should at least get one or two done, is, so I have a length of the, what is it, Peaches and Cream. Let me hold this up here so you can you see that? The studio lights really blow it out, don't they? This is the brand that Twilaty recommended, and I saw how well it worked in hers, so just in the interest of not reinventing the wheel, that's what I bought. Like, I could have just used regular yarn, I guess, but I thought I'll go with what she used because it worked well. I see that it worked well, and this is not for theater, but it's hard for me to abandon those theatrical milliner practices of, like, if somebody's already figured out that something works, then don't change it unless you have a good reason why you have to, because you don't have time to make a different choice and then have it totally not work, except then you don't have a bonnet for opening night. Again, this doesn't really matter because I'm making this for fun, but you know, it's never going to go on stage. I guess I made a Regency bonnet in this studio stream over the course of like 6 months. It took a long time. It was made out of strip straw braid. And there's actually, I made a whole video about how to make it that consolidated it down into like 10 minutes instead of 6 months. Or you can watch the like 7 or 8 hours of studio stream of me working on it. But when that bonnet was done, I knew that it would never get used at the theater where I work because the bonnet's too deep. You can't light anyone's face inside of an actual historically accurate coal scuttle bonnet. You know, it's always going to be more shallow than it would have been in the time period. But I wanted to make it accurate. Like I wanted it to be a copy of the one that I had found, and because it was a pandemic and I wasn't making it for a theater, I was making it out of my own materials for my own amusement. When I was done, I was like, I can't donate this to the theater, right? Like, because it won't get used, or they'll make me destroy it to remove half of the length of it. But I got in touch with the folks at the Jane Austen Summer Program, which I'm in Durham, North Carolina, and I teach at UNC-Chapel Hill, and the Jane Austen Summer Program occurs in normal times in Chapel Hill on the campus of UNC. And so I messaged them and I said, I have this accurate reproduction of a Regency bonnet made of strip straw that I created. We'll never use it at PlayMakers. I did it for my own edification, I guess, and I would love to gift it to the Jane Austen Summer Program and, do with it what you want. Like if you want to put it on display, have people take selfies with it on. Like if you want to use it in a performance, they do theatricals, like folks did in ye oldie times, pre-television. Or you want to do a drawing for it. Like I was like, do whatever you want with it. And they were very excited to receive it. So that bonnet, if you are a Regency enthusiast or scholar, and you will be virtually attending the Jane Austen Summer Program, you may see it in whatever incarnation they choose to use it in. I've hit a snag in my plan, and I don't have a good idea of a solution, but I'm sure one will come to me, because in making this piece here, so it's like, it's big enough that it won't even fit in this screen here unless I, it's a segment of an arc, or a segment of a circle. It's an arc, really long, with the idea that I'm going to draw it up, and I want it to be fairly large around the outside edge. So I took 2 pieces of taffeta and I sewed them into a big long arcing tube, stitched the top and the bottom, turned it inside out, pressed it, and then turned the ends in. So I have sort of a finished edge. I might need to take my glasses off, because now what I need to do is open up this channel from this opposite end so that my needle can come back out, because right now it's getting caught in, there we go. It's getting caught in that worked. So note to self, what I actually need is fail. Come on. What I actually need is a crochet hook, or it could even be like a shish kebab skewer. I need a thing that I can sort of open the way for my needle so that I don't get hung up in my turned back seam allowance fold. But for now, I put one section through the first channel, well, the second channel. I'm a little leery of this edge channel. I don't want to do that on the stream because I think it's just going to be a time-consuming festival of frustration, and I don't want to bore you guys with that. But I can tell, having pulled that through here, I think this is going to be a good plan. I am cautiously optimistic about the toiletty method of using peaches and cream cotton floss. That music that you hear in the background is my alarm telling me that that's the end of my stream. So I had hoped that I would get to do more than one channel, but I guess I did talk quite a bit about all of the different influences, the influence of the collage on the drawn bonnet style, and then the way that the drawn bonnet style evolved over the history of millinery at the beginning of the 19th century. And I'm so thrilled to have found this resource here as an example, because she has done such great research about this particular time period that it can inform other eras prior to this in which you're making corded or wired bonnets, or other things. Like, I feel like you could use these kinds of methods for all kinds of support structures in other areas of fashion. So as I wind up this stream, I want to, I mentioned this at the beginning of the stream, but I'll reiterate now. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 8 p.m. British Standard Time, I'll be a guest on Facebook Live on Fun Friday Millinery, Study Millinery with Denise Wallace-Spriggs, and she and I will be talking about, we've known one another as milliners. I was her millinery assistant in 1998, and then we've stayed in touch, followed one another's careers in the intervening time. Sandra asks, are there several channels next to each other? On mine, there are not. However, on many of these mid-century bonnets that she studies, there's 4 or 5 butted right up next to each other at the edge to impart a really stable bonnet brim edge. And in this collage that my student made, if I put it up here close, you can see there's 5 channels in a row right close to each other here, and then they're pretty close. There's I guess about a centimeter between them here at the very edge. So when you put several channels next to each other, that's creating an area of more dense stability than you would have when you space them out. On mine, I can show you where they are. So this is I've stitched, there's a channel on the very edge, then there's one about 1 inch away, and then there's one about 1 1/4 inches away from that, and then there's quite an expanse with one in the middle here. My idea being that I want this to bell out a little bit, and that maybe, I don't know, because I'm going to have to get all of the stuff in here, all of the cords in here, and then draw it up and see. And what I may find out is that I wish I had 3 or 4 close together here at the middle, and I may have to flatten it all back out and stitch some more channels in there. But that's part of this is really experimentation of figuring out how much structure is imparted by the closeness of the channels or farther away, and how much structure is imparted by the ruffling of the taffeta in there. So that's maybe next week I'm just answering questions, but maybe I will have part of this threaded up enough to have a more educated opinion on whether several channels next to each other is something I find desirable in this one that I'm making, or if it's something that feels like it's too, I don't want to say clunky. I guess it depends on the final shape of the bonnet bell that I want it to be. But that's a great question, and I hope to have an answer by next week. In addition to my guest appearance on Fun Friday Millinery tomorrow afternoon, I alluded to it, but I'll mention it. for sure, next week is my anniversary party stream, because it is in the midst of next week that is the actual date of the 15th anniversary of content creation under the name La Bricoleuse. And my plan right now is to answer questions, whatever questions people have about costuming, about blogging and creating content on other platforms about costume production, careers in costume production, getting into grad school. Like, do you need to go to grad school? What if you don't care about academia? I will answer whatever question you have. So please leave those questions in comments on this video, or comments on any of the other social media which I'm involved as La Bricoleuse. Or you can ask them in real time attending the stream next week. Regardless, come have a drink with me and have a toast and share some snacks and some conversation. And I will have some answers about this bonnet next time, when I will get much farther between now and then on threading up my bonnet brim. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope to see you, if not at Fun Friday Millinery tomorrow, then for my anniversary stream next week here on YouTube. I want to also